So 1 minute and we start. Just waiting a little bit. 25. Great. Okay, I think we can start. Great. So today is our second lecture, psychology part. As I said, we've got two parts of our course. It's psychology and pedagogy. And this is the second lecture of psychology. And today we've got two parts of our lecture. It's research methods in psychology and conscious and unconscious minds. So it's two parts. And we start from research methods in psychology, and then we'll speak about Freud's theory, about our conscience, about our dreams and so on. So let's start. Research methods in psychology. Psychology research can usually be classified as one of three major types. So we've got the first one is casual or experimental research, and later we'll speak about experiment more. So casual or experimental research, when most people think of scientific experimentation, research on case and effects is most often brought to mind. Experiments on causal relationship investigate the effect of one or more variable on one or more outcome variable. This type of research also determines if of variable causes another variable to occur or change. An example of this type of research will be changing the amount of a specific treatment and measuring the effect of study participant. Descriptive research. Descriptive research seeks to depict what already exists in a group or population. An example of this type of research will be an opinion poll to determine which presidential candidate people plan to vote for in the next election, for example. Descriptive studies don't try to measure the effect of variable, they seek only to describe it. The third one, relational or correlational research. A study that investigates the connection between two or more variables in considered relational research. The variables that are compared are generally already present in the group or population. For example, a study that looks at the proportion of males and females that would share either of a classical CD or a jazz CD will be studying the relationship between gender and music preference. But in the three big types, we need to speak about the most popular research in psychology. And first is case study. So case study research falls under the qualitative branch of research methodology. Case study involve deep inquiry into individual, group, communities, or events. They often combine a multi-methodological approach that integrates participant interview and unobstructive observation. Case studies in the psychology discipline are typically conducted on specific individuals. A psychology case study most often collects silent and seminal biographical moments from a patient's past, as well as important events in the individual's daily life that may animate maladaptive behavior and thinking. Case studies are conducted by interviewing and observing patient behavior. The researchers describe their behavior and discuss events from the patient perspective. Often the interviews are instructed and the observation are the individual going about his or her everyday life. Other sources of data may include journals, notes, photos, etc. Data is often evaluated to find common themes and interpretation. So, for example, we can see the benefits of a psychology case study. Next research. Experiment. Of course, experiment is the most popular psychology research, and we know a lot of different experiments in psychology, for example, Pavlov's dogs or another one. So, experiment also this introduces a broad kind of research that can be a component of many methods. The term here is used to denote a specific procedure. In science, experiments are the and often used methods of research, and there are certain principles involved in its employment. One of the principles of a control group. This is an individual or a group of individuals that is not manipulated. Another principle is the control of variables. That is, the experiment should be as free of external data as possible. This factor enables psychologists to repeat the experiments, and that is one requirement to reliable research. The third principle is the consistency of measurements. Alone differing standards make replication impossible and the results unreliable. The first principle involved is showing cause and effect. That is, the manipulation performed in the experiment led to the result, and nothing else was involved. Experiments can be laboratory controlled, like sleep study, for example, field experiments that allow the psychologist to manipulate the subject but not his environment, or natural experiments which allow no control and are largely observational. Of course, experiments is the most hard methods in psychology. And there are three main types of experiments: field experiments, lab experiments, and natural experiments. Lab experiments are conducted in highly controlled setting and may or may not be conducted in a scientific laboratory. The strength of this methodology are that the experiments are easy to replicate and allow for fastidious control or variable. Limitations include the artificial setting, which may cause unnatural reaction and potential research bias. So, for example, in this picture, we can see a control group and experimental group. And the experiment will student test scores be affected by distraction sounds in the testing environment. And so, by these experiments, we can show how some noisy sounds or nervous situation can be affected to students. Next, observational study. Observational study is a qualitative research that can be carried out in a myriad of different ways using non-experimental means where behavior is simply observed systematically. The main objective in observational research is to discover variables that may impact behavior and individual, group, and social construct. The research is described as non-experimental because it occurs in a natural setting without control. Observational research can involve mixed methods that may include multiple qualitative, technical, and quantitative methods. Naturalistic observation is described as observation that take place in the participant's nature environment. For example, psychologists studying mental health in the penal system will observe uncared people in jails and prisons. In some instances, their observation may take place without the participant's knowledge. This is known as distinguished naturalistic observation, and it is considered ethical in the individuals remains anonymous and the observation takes place in public context where no expectation of privacy exists. When distinguished natural observation is not possible, undistinguished natural observation may be effective. However, this can cause a phenomenon known as reactivity. Reactivity occurs when participants know they are being observed, which causes a change in their behavior that negatively impacts data. Reactivity can be mitigated or even eliminated with long observation as people get more comfortable with being observed. This can be seen in reality television shows where individuals are on the best behavior at the onset, then as time goes by, the behavior becomes more natural. Participants' observation differ from naturalistic observational methods in that the researcher is involved. The goals are the same, but the researcher engages in the setting and with the individuals. The rationale for these methods is that some data cannot be collected without the researcher participating. Participant observation also includes the distinguished methods. For example, here we see naturalistic observation and where participant observation and no participant. So here we can understand the difference between these two groups. And of course, naturalistic is understandable. Survey. So survey is very popular method. Survey research can be both quantitative and qualitative, and it is widely used not only psychology research but across the science. Respondents, those answering the question, send surveys and are asked to self-report their actions, thoughts, and feelings to measure how certain variable may impact them. One of the most critical aspects of survey research is the sampling method used. Most research prefer large samples that are representative of the population they are studying to obtain a representative estimate of what is accurate among the population. Samples in psychology are often random and very large. Surveys vary greatly. They can be lengthy or quite short. They can be conducted over a variety of communication channels such as over the internet, person, the mail, by telephone, and with video chat. The data collected can be used for quantitative purpose or qualitative measure, depending on the purpose of the research and the design of the questions. Surveys are used widely across the social science. They have their roots in documenting the prevalence in social problems, including poverty and overall economic conditions. They are widely used among healthcare providers, including psychologists and public health professionals and academics, to measure the prevalence of mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, drug and alcohol abuse. Survey research, like all other forms of study, has its strengths and weaknesses. Its strengths include the ability to gather qualitative data and the relatively low cost. Some of the weaknesses are the potential for poor question design due to bias and poor sampling. So of course now the most popular variety of survey is Google Form. Students very often use Google Form because it's easier, but not always Google Form is really need to use, because sometimes survey in paper is much better. But there you can see classical Google Form. Next, content analysis. So, these methods of research involve analyzing large amount of text-based data in an effort of identifying meanings and thematic consistency. It can be used in quantitative and qualitative context. For example, quantitative researchers may search for specific words or phrases and add them for a final count. Qualitative content analysts search more for the meaning of texts through the identification of themes in the data. Qualitative analysis of this kind relies on the practice of coding and categorizing the content to make sense of it. Researchers often use the technique known as close reading, in which phrases are turned into code units. The text is read rapidly until all of the texts are coded and the point of data saturation has been reached. This process is inductive analysis because no theory is being tested. Rather, the data is coded in an effort to see if a theory emerges. This process is known as conventional or formative analysis. Directed analysis is similar to formative analysis, but its variety in an integral way. A directed approach is somewhat deductive, as the research begins with some theories or hypotheses in mind to help them create coding units from one set of the study. When we analyze content, is more for science research, and also these methods very popular in history. So this was the most important research in psychology, and for better understanding I show you a small video about the main important researches, and I think I need to do it here. So
welcome. Today we're going to be discussing research methods in psychology here at Learning the Social Sciences. Psychologists use different techniques to conduct research and collect data to draw conclusions in order to learn more about the mind and behavior. Well-designed research helps psychologists to make logical and supported conclusions instead of just relying on common sense and assumptions. There are different ways that psychologists approach data collection. Now, the most popular and most known, of course, are just having psychologists conduct an experiment. But there's a long list of other forms of studies and ways that they can research to be able to draw conclusions. For example, they could do a correlational study, a case study, longitudinal study, or cross-sectional study. You also have survey research where they can send out surveys and gain a lot of information. You can also have a scientific approach to a naturalistic observation. When thinking about psychology, people tend to focus on experiments, where a researcher manipulates and controls certain variables to see the effect on other variables. Simply put, researchers can see through data a cause and effect relationship with their studies. While conducting the experiment, the researcher follows the scientific method and can perform their experiment in a lab or out in the field. They could also have a quasi-experiment that is both in the lab and out in the field. A case study is when a researcher focuses on one person, a group, or a specific situation. Freud was known for using case studies to form his theories. Some of the most famous and widely known studies were Phineas Gage and Jeannie. Phineas Gage suffered a catastrophic injury when a tapping iron from his work on the railroad shot through his frontal lobe, causing permanent brain damage, but somehow he survived. His doctor recorded his change in behavior and demeanor and associated that with the location in his brain. And so, with that, we can now know that personality and the frontal lobe are related. Of course, a lot of other work has gone into it to really confirm that. But in terms of the 1800s in a case study, it really provided a lot of evidence for what is going on. Jeannie was a girl who experienced severe child abuse and neglect, and she was raised in isolation, attached to a potty chair, and only fed baby food until her mother helped her escape when she was 13 years old. She could not talk, she had difficulty walking, and so a team was assembled to help Jeannie to learn how to talk, to properly walk, and how to socialize. Through research with Jeannie, a lot has been known about linguistics and just the stages of development, and if certain stages have to be accomplished by a certain time period. Researchers can collect and examine data with correlational studies to see if there is a relationship between two or more items. Sometimes correlational studies are conducted because performing an experiment is not possible or ethical. For example, a psychologist can look at drinking alcohol and bouts of anger, but you would never go and have somebody in a lab setting repeatedly drink alcohol to see and then maybe encourage some bouts of anger to appear. Correlational studies cannot prove cause and effect relationships. If a researcher does a study on the relationship between self-esteem and career promotions, one cannot know for absolute certainty if their career advancement is the sole cause for their self-esteem or if there are other contributing factors. However, it can give insight into the questions that the psychologists are asking. One of the most common methods for researchers to gather data is through a survey, in the survey method. A psychologist creates a survey, a test, or a questionnaire on a specific topic or variable of interest and then gives it to a random sample of participants. It is an effective and fast way to gather information, but the data relies on the questions being written well and the participants to accurately represent the sample sought. However, if one needs information about a large group of people, a survey is really the best method to collect a lot of data. Longitudinal studies are a type of correlational research. The research for these studies can occur over a period of weeks, months, or years. Some last several decades. One example of a longitudinal study is if a researcher wants to see if diet can slow down the oncoming symptoms of dementia. They may start to track people's diets in their 30s and then follow up with them throughout the rest of the course of their life to see if there are dietary changes and to see if and when they start to exhibit symptoms of dementia. This type of research can give valuable information when studying development and lifespan issues. However, the research can be expensive and other variables may impact the data. Also, some participants might drop out over the course of the study. A cross-sectional study compares participants of different ages at one time. If a researcher wants to see about intelligence scores from different age groups and to see if scores change over the course of one's lifespan, then this type of study would provide sufficient data. Cross-sectional studies are good at providing information about the current population and can show characteristics of a given population. One does not manipulate variables in this type of study, and one cannot determine a cause and effect relationship. Naturalistic observations do happen in the field of psychology. Social scientists and psychologists utilize naturalistic observations when lab research would not be possible due to costs or because of how it would affect the participants' behavior. Researchers observe subjects in their real life environment and see how they respond to certain situations. For example, when looking at the student teacher relationship, a researcher would opt to spend time in a classroom than trying to recreate a classroom in a lab setting. It just makes more sense to go where people are really just acting as normal. So these have been different types of research methods in psychology. If you have any questions,
So we watch small video, 7-8 minutes about research and how can we use this research. And this was our first part of lecture about scientific research. And the second part is a very interesting part about conscious and unconscious. So conscious and unconscious minds. We've got two parts of this part of lecture. First is about Freuds Theory, and second is about modern thoughts about conscious and unconscious. And also watch two small videos about our conscience. So, we start from Freud's theory. And in Freud theory, we've got three types of minds. So, Sigmund Freud believed that behavior and personality were derived from the constants of unique interaction of conflicting psychological forces that operate at three different levels of awareness. It's the preconscious, conscious, and unconscious. He believed that each of these parts of the mind plays an important role in influencing behavior. In order to understand Freud theory, it is essential to first understand what he believed each part of personality did, how it operated, and how these three elements interact to contribute to the human experience. Each level of awareness has a role to play in shaping human behavior and thought. Very often, we can see Freud's three levels of mind like iceberg. And here you can see it's conscious mind and preconscious, and unconscious is over there. We will see it later. It's very famous Freud theory. In Russia we got Freud, but in English it's Freud, but Freud is the same like Freud, of course. So, about Sigmund Freud a little bit. Sigmund Freud was the founder of psychoanalytic theory. While his ideas were considered shocking at the time and create debate and controversy even now, his work had a profound influence on a number of disciplines including psychology, sociology, anthropology, literature, and even art. The term psychoanalysis is used to refer the many aspects of Freud's work and research, including Freudian therapy and the research methodology he used to develop his theory. Freud relied heavily upon his observation and case study of his patient when he formed his theory of personality development. So, Freud's three levels of mind. Freud delineated the mind in the distinct level, each of which their own roles and function. So first is the preconscious, consists of anything that could potentially be brought into the conscious mind. Second is the conscious mind, contains all of the thoughts, memory, feeling, and wishes of which we are aware at any given moment. This is the aspect of our mental processing that we can think and talk about rationally. This also includes our memory, which is not always part of consciousness but can be retrieved easily and brought into awareness. The unconscious mind is the third part, is a reservoir of feelings, thoughts, anger, and memories that are outside of our conscious awareness. The unconscious contains contents that are unacceptable or unpleasant, such as feeling of pain or some conflict. Freud linked the three layers of mind to an iceberg. The top of the iceberg that you can see above the water represents the conscious mind. The part of the iceberg that is so much below the water but is still visible, the preconscious, and the back of the iceberg that lies unseen beneath the waterline represents the unconscious. Also, later I will show you this iceberg. The Freudian sleep. One way to understand how the conscious and unconscious mind operate is to look at what is known as the sleep of the tongue. Many of us have experienced what is commonly referred to as Freudian sleep at some point or another. The misstatements are believed to reveal underlying unconscious thoughts or feelings. Freud believed that while the unconscious mind is largely inaccessible, the context can sometimes bubble up unexpectedly, such as dreams or sleep of the tongue. Freud believed that sleep showed the sudden intrusion of unconscious mind into the conscious mind, often due to unresolved or repressed feeling. So, according to Freud, thoughts and emotion outside of our awareness continue to exert an influence on our behaviors, even though we are unconscious of the underlying influence. The unconscious can include repressed feelings, hidden memories, habits, thoughts, desire, and reaction. Memories and emotions that are too painful, embarrassing, shameful, or distressing to consciously face are stored into an enormous reservoir that makes up the unconscious mind. To identify the roots of psychological distress, Freud employed techniques like dream analysis or free association to bring through feelings to light. Role of the preconscious mind. The contents of the conscious mind include all of the things that you are actively aware of. The closely related preconscious mind contains all of the things that you could potentially pull into conscious awareness. The preconscious also acts as something of a guard controlling the information that is allowed to enter into conscious awareness. Preconscious memory are not the same thing as memory that are rudely accessed, such as remembering or your way home, for example. There are unprocessed memories that we extract for a specific purpose at specific time. So there was a Freud theory about conscious and unconscious, and of course, conscience now is very important and popular thing, and it's big part of cognitive psychology. Last lecture I told you about cognitive psychology, as you remember. So, and we'll speak about conscious and unconscious, like about the two parts of cognitive psychology. So, as we say, consciousness is everything you experience. It is there unstuck in your head, the sweetness of chocolate mousse, the throbbing pain of a toothpaste, the fierce love for your child, and the bitter knowledge that eventually all things will end. Consciousness refers to your individual awareness of your unique thoughts, memories, feelings, sensations, and environments. Essentially, your consciousness is your awareness of yourself and the world around you. This awareness is subjective and unique to you. If you can describe something you are experiencing in words, then it is a part of your consciousness. Your conscious experience are constantly shifting and changing. For example, in one moment you may be focused on reading this article. Your conscience may then shift to the memory of a conversation you had earlier with your friend, for example. Next, you may notice how uncomfortable your chair is, or maybe you are mentally planning dinner. This ever-shifting stream of thoughts can change dramatically from one moment to the next, but your experience of it seems smooth and effortless. So here you can see a footprint of experience and some awareness that can work like our own experience. And another picture is old picture, of course, how in 19th century psychology think about our mind, about our brain, about our consciousness, of course. And here, of course, it's more modern. So, type of consciousness. There are a number of things that can cause change or alteration in consciousness. Some of these occur naturally, while others are the result of things such as drugs or damage to the brain. Changes to consciousness can also result in changes in perception, thinking, understanding, and interpretation of the world. Some different states of consciousness include our dreams, some hallucination, hypnosis, meditation, sleep, states induced by psychoactive drugs. There are two normal states of awareness: is consciousness and unconsciousness. Altered levels of consciousness can also occur, which may be caused by medical or mental conditions that impair or change awarenesses. And of course, we've got some types of altered types of consciousness, which include coma, confusion, delirium, disorientational, lethargy, stupor. And doctor and healthcare professionals may use different assessment to measure and assess level of consciousness. Score on this assessment may be used to guide diagnosis and treatment decision. And also you can see it on the picture. Conscious experience, deep sleep, and some bad contacts. Also this locked-in syndrome, for example, dreaming. So you can see it's more content to you. So understanding different levels of consciousness can help healthcare professionals spot signs that someone might be experiencing a problem. Changes in consciousness can sometimes be a sign of medical condition, or they may even be a sign of an immediately medical emergency. For example, sudden change in consciousness might be a sign of aneurysm, brain infection, brain tumor of injury, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, drug use, epilepsy, heart disease, head stroke, lack of oxygen to the brain, low blood sugar, poisoning, shock, stroke, and etc. Also, we've got a lot of theories of consciousness. One of the problems with the study of consciousness is the lack of a universally accepted operational definition. Descartes proposed in the idea of cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, suggested that the very act of thinking demonstrates the reality of one's existence and consciousness. While today consciousness is generally defined as an awareness of yourself and the world, and there are still debates about the different aspects of these awarenesses. Research on consciousness have focused on understanding the neuroscience behind our conscious experience. Scientists have even utilized brain scanning technology to seek out specific neurons that might be linked to different conscious events. Modern research have proposed two major theories of consciousness: integrated information theory and global workspace theory. Let's speak about these two modern theories. So first, integrated information theory. This approach looks at consciousness by learning more about the physical process that underlie our conscious experience. The theory attempts to create a measure of the integrated information that form consciousness. The quality of an organism's consciousness is represented by the level of integration. This theory tends to focus on whether something is conscious and to what degree it is conscious. Global workspace theory. This theory suggests that we have a memory bank from which the brain draws information to form the experience of conscious awareness, while integrated information theory focuses more on identifying whether of organism in conscience. The global workspace theory offers a much broader approach to understanding how consciousness works. While consciousness has intrigued philosophers and scientists for thousands of years, experts clearly have a long way to go in our understanding of the concept. So this was information about our conscience, and let's see a small video about our conscience. Yes, of course.
Here are two images of a house. There is one obvious difference, but to this patient, PS, they looked completely identical. PS had suffered a stroke that damaged the right side of her brain, leaving her unaware of everything on her left side. But though she could discern no difference between the houses, when researchers asked her which she would prefer to live in, she chose the house that wasn't burning. Not once, but again and again. PS's brain was still processing information from her whole field of vision. She could see both images and tell the difference between them. She just didn't know it. If someone threw a ball at her left side, she might duck, but she wouldn't have any awareness of the ball or any idea why she ducked. PS's condition, known as hemispatial neglect, reveals an important distinction between the brain's processing of information and our experience of that processing. That experience is what we call consciousness. We are conscious of both the external world and our internal selves. We are aware of an image in much the same way we are aware of ourselves looking at an image, or our inner thoughts and emotions. But where does consciousness come from? Scientists, theologians, and philosophers have been trying to get to the bottom of this question for centuries without reaching any consensus. One recent theory is that consciousness is the brain's imperfect picture of its own activity. To understand this theory, it helps to have a clear idea of one important way the brain processes information from our senses. Based on sensory input, it builds models, which are continuously updating simplified descriptions of objects and events in the world. Everything we know is based on these models. They never capture every detail of the things they describe, just enough for the brain to determine appropriate responses. For instance, one model built deep into the visual system codes white light as brightness without color. In reality, white light includes wavelengths that correspond to all the different colors we can see. Our perception of white light is wrong and oversimplified, but good enough for us to function. Likewise, the brain's model of the physical body keeps track of the configuration of our limbs, but not of individual cells or even muscles, because that level of information isn't needed to plan movement. If it didn't have the model keeping track of the body's size, shape, and how it is moving at any moment, we would quickly injure ourselves. The brain also needs models of itself. For example, the brain has the ability to pay attention to specific objects and events. It also controls that focus, shifting it from one thing to another, internal and external, according to our needs. Without the ability to direct our focus, we wouldn't be able to assess threats, finish a meal, or function at all. To control focus effectively, the brain has to construct a model of its own attention. With 86 billion neurons constantly interacting with each other, there's no way the brain's model of its own information processing can be perfectly self-descriptive. But like the model of the body, or our conception of white light, it doesn't have to be. Our certainty that we have a metaphysical, subjective experience may come from one of the brain's models, a cut-corner description of what it means to process information in a focused and deep manner. Scientists have already begun trying to figure out how the brain creates that self-model. MRI studies are a promising avenue for pinpointing the networks involved. These studies compare patterns of neural activation when someone is and isn't conscious of a sensory stimulus, like an image. The results show that the areas needed for visual processing are activated whether or not the participant is aware of the image, but a whole additional network lights up only when they are conscious of seeing the image. Patients with hemispatial neglect, like PS, typically have damage to one particular part of this network. More extensive damage to the network can sometimes lead to a vegetative state, with no sign of consciousness. Evidence like this brings us closer to understanding how consciousness is built into the brain, but there's still much more to learn. For instance, the way neurons in the networks related to consciousness compute specific pieces of information is outside the scope of our current technology. As we approach questions of consciousness with science, we'll open new lines of inquiry into human identity. To continue exploring life's big questions, check out this playlist.
So this was an interesting video about our consciousness. And let's speak more about unconscion in modern theory, and of course we'll speak about Freud again. So, as I said, unconscion, sometimes we see like an iceberg. Here you can see it again. So our consciousness, preconscion, and unconscion. Also in Freud theory, it was different names like ego, superego, and ID. Also you can see. In Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory of personality, the unconscious mind is defined as a reservoir of feeling, thought, arguments, memories that are outside of conscious awareness. Within this understanding, most of the contents of the unconscious are considered something unpleasant, such feeling of pain or conflict. Freud believed that the unconscious continue to influence behavior even though people are aware of the underlying influence. So, impact of the unconscious. Unconscious thoughts, beliefs, and feelings can potentially cause a number of problems, including anger, bias, compulsive behavior, difficult social interaction, distress, relationship problem. Freud believed that bringing the context of the unconscious into awareness was important for relieving psychological distress. More recently, researchers have explored different techniques to help see how unconscious influence can impact behaviors. There are a few different ways that information from the unconscious might be brought into conscious awareness of study by researchers. And also we read about free association and dream interpretation. Let's speak about them more deeply. So Freud believed that he could bring unconscious feelings into awareness through the use of a technique called free association. He asked patients to relax and say whatever came to mind without any consideration of how trivial, irrelevant, or embarrassing it might be. By tracing these streams of thoughts, Freud believed he could uncover the context of the unconscious mind where repressed desire and painful childhood memories existed. So free association we use now too in modern psychology, and it's very popular methods. Dream interpretation. Freud also suggested that dreams were another road to the unconscious. While information from the unconscious mind may sometimes appear in dreams, he believed that it was often a distinguished form. As such, from Freud's point of view, dream interpretation will require examining of the literal content of a dream, known as manifest content, to try to uncover the hidden unconscious meaning of the dream, the latent content. Freud also believed that dreams were a form of wish fulfillment. Because this unconscious algo could not be expressed in waking life, he believed they find expression in dreams. Also, interesting dream interpretation was in Carl Gustav Jung, and we can see a lot of work about dream in his work. So, Carl Gustav Jung. We will speak about him later on our seminars. Conscious flash suppression. Modern cognitive psychology research has shown that even perceptions that we don't consciously attend to can have a powerful impact of behavior. Using a technique called continuous flash suppression, researchers are able to display an image without people consciously seeing it because they are instead distracted by another visual display. Research has shown that people will rate certain visual displays more negatively when they are paired with the negative or less desirable invisible image, such as a picture of angry face, for example. Even though people have a conscious awareness of even see those negative images, exposure to them still has an effect on the behavior and choices. While Sigmund Freud didn't invent the concept of unconscious mind, he did popularize it to the point that it is now largely stated with the psychoanalytic theory. Again. So, also to understand what's the difference between conscious and unconscious, we watch our last video for today. So, it will about conscious and unconscious in generally and the difference between them.
The conscious, subconscious, and the unconscious mind form the three levels of the mind on which several studies have been conducted by the famous Austrian psychologist Sigmund Freud. These studies just have a theoretical basis, as it is very difficult to prove this scientifically. The three levels of the human mind can be very well studied by making use of the triangle analogy. The tips of the triangle are compared to the conscious mind that occupies a very small portion of the space. It is a reference to the fact that the conscious mind accounts for only 10% of the brain functioning. Under this comes the section that occupies slightly larger space than the conscious mind. The section comprises of the preconscious, or in other words, the subconscious mind, which accounts for 50 to 60% of the brain functioning. Below the section of the preconscious mind lies the section of the unconscious mind that fills up the remaining space up to the base of the triangle. Thus, the unconscious mind accounts for 30 to 40% of the brain functioning. This part of the brain is deep and dark and has the least accessibility to conscious thoughts. The conscious mind is referred to as the master of the brain. It is the part of the mind through the means of which other people are able to understand and associate with the person. This part of the brain is responsible for communicating with the outside world through the means of pictures, facts, figures, writing, speaking, thought, and physical movement. The subconscious mind is referred to as the storehouse of the brain. It keeps track of all of the memories and past experiences of any specific trauma or any normal incident that has been forgotten by the conscious part of the brain and is no longer of any importance to the person. The subconscious, or the preconscious part of the brain, is in continuous contact with the unconscious part of the brain. The belief, attitude, habits, and behaviors of a person are formed on the basis of the memories and experiences stored within the preconscious mind. The unconscious mind establishes a contact with the conscious mind through the means of the subconscious mind. It is this interaction which makes the interaction of the people with the surrounding world meaningful. It lets the person communicate to the environment and the people in it through the means of emotions, feelings, sensation, imagination, and dreams. A detailed explanation of all of the three levels of mind has been given below. The conscious mind. Until now, there doesn't exist any definite definition for defining the conscious mind. However, it has been proposed that the factor distinguishing the conscious mind from the preconscious or the unconscious mind is awareness. But it would be wrong to refer to the subconscious mind as being unaware. Several studies have been lodged that demonstrates the influence of environment and the surroundings on the people, even when they are under the effect of anesthetic or are in deep sleep. There are cases when one drives to the destination but has no memory of the trip after reaching the destination. In such cases, it is the subconscious mind that is aware and is responsible for performing all the necessary functions. The conscious mind is also believed to perform the function of thinking and logical reasoning. Even this fact does not distinguish the conscious mind from the subconscious or the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind is also contemplated to be the storehouse of all the emotions, memories, and habits, and thus makes it capable of carrying out logical reasoning and thinking properly. Let's understand the working of the conscious mind through the means of an example. At the time when the humans are a tiny baby, the development of conscious part of the brain is incomplete, which makes it incompetent for testing and measuring all of the information from the environment. During this stage, it is the subconscious and the unconscious part of the mind that performs majority of the functions, such as identification of nipple or bottle as the source of food, to know and understand that crying gets them the attention of the people, to elucidate the cuddles given by parents as a sign of safety and love, and many other things. Hence, during this stage, it is the subconscious and the unconscious mind that is working hard, which help them in developing logical patterns of association, which are important for their survival in further life. From all of the studies and the discussions, it has been concluded that the conscious mind is responsible for performing two main functions which no other part of the mind can perform. These are as follows. First, directing your focus. It is a known fact that the subconscious part of the mind is more active in terms of creating a sense of awareness about the environment as compared to the conscious mind, and has the capability to work during sleep conditions. However, it is important to know and understand the fact that the subconscious mind works on the orders of the conscious mind. For instance, if your thoughts are negative in the conscious mind, then even the subconscious mind will deliver your emotions, feelings, and thoughts that are related to negative thinking. Through this, the feelings and emotions will become a reality, and if the person's mind would not be able to overcome negativity, then he or she would get caught in a never-ending circle of negativity, anxiety, and fear. There are some people who are able to maintain a positive feeling and consider the situations in their life to be positive. The way a person's feelings about his or her life is highly dependent on the way a person's subconscious and unconscious mind was programmed at the time of birth. The ability of the conscious mind to make decisions about how it makes the person feel, i.e. positive or negative, happy or angry, pessimism or optimism, is one of the most dynamic powers that our mind holds. The thoughts that a person develops and holds within its mind are considered to be one of the true freedoms that are possessed by human beings. A person caught up in prison under worsened and inhumane conditions can still choose to be free from the mind by directing his or her thoughts from the conscious mind towards positivity.
So now I think the part about conscious and unconscious is very important and quite hard part of psychology is understandable for you. So the notion of the unconscious continues to play a role in modern psychology as researchers strive to understand how the mind operates outside of conscious awareness. Researchers continue to explore the different bases of consciousness, including the physical, social, cultural, and psychological influence that contribute to our consciousness awarenesses. So, we finished with our second part about conscious and unconscious, and this part from this part later in the third lecture we start to speak about mental process, and we will speak about our memory, our feelings, our character, our temperament, and it will be our third lecture. But for psychology it's very important to understand what's mean conscious, what's mean unconscious, because this is a very important part of our mind, and it's important to understand what does it mean. And of course it's really hard part of psychology, and cognitive psychology, psychoanalytic psychology still interesting in it. So we finished with our second lecture. It was two parts. So research methods in psychology and conscious and unconscious mind. So if you've got some question, we've got time and I can answer it. You can write in this small chat if you've got some question, because now I can see your question, your names here. Yes, I see it. So we've got something like 5 minutes for it. If you got some question, please. So the video here is a little bit slower, that's why I'm waiting where, I see something. Interesting question. How is possible to see dreams in different languages? Sometimes it's because of multicultural situation. We watch television, we see some video in another languages, and we remember it. And sometimes our brain, our consciousness, and unconscious make these multi-language dreams. But another theory, it's not psychological theory, but also that in previous lives we know these languages maybe. But if we say about modern psychology and about this time, it's because of a lot of multi-video video in another language in YouTube, in Instagram, and TikTok, and so on. So we see it, we heard it, and that's why our mind remembers some words, because we can't check, for example, correct we saying in our dreams in this language or not. But it's really interesting sometimes. When we started to speak about Carl Gustav Jung, I think we will speak about dream more, because our dreams, it's a really interesting part of psychology, and it's a really hard part of psychology, because it's unconscious, and unconscious we can't see it, we just can feel it. But I think we can speak about it also when we speak about our imagination, about our way to, for example, draw or to play music. We'll speak about it too. So today we'll speak about dream. So I'm not a professional in dreams because sometimes dream is just a dream. We just sleep and see something. Because, for example, we can see in dreams we can fly or something, some disease, something like that. Sometimes it's just a dream, but sometimes you can something like I don't know how to explain. Maybe our brain just very tired, or we need more relaxing, or we need to think about our health. But I can say truly that if in our dream we see something bad, it doesn't mean that bad is happening. It's just a dream. We just can maybe think about our health more or relaxing more, but it's just a dream. We need to understand that our unconscious is something very strange, and sometimes our unconscious can play bad games with us. We can dream about flying, and then we can see something bad or some nightmares. Sometimes we see nightmares when we watch some movie, or we read some strange book, or we thought about something really scary, and our unconscious draw this picture, and of course it's scared for us. But sometimes it's just a play, a game of our mind. And our mind is really like to play a game with us. In psychology, we've got some professional scientists in dream association and so on. And internet, we can find some answer about our dream, but we've got a lot of different theories about our dreams. For example, behaviorism thought that it's just some brain impulses and nothing else. Psychoanalytic thought that it's our unconscious, and so it's really a hard question, because we don't have one answer for it, but it's really interesting to read about dreams and so on. Maybe it's not issue, maybe it's some just dream maybe. But also, if you're interested in dream, you can read the book of Carl Gustav Jung, and he wrote a lot of about dreams and how to understand our dreams. So you can read Carl Gustav Jung. So another question if you've got, and also about if you've got some question you can write. We've got something like maybe 5-6 minutes, More about these two part of our lection. Next seminar it will be test in two parts. First part about research and second part about conscion and unconscion. So it's something like 10 or 15 questions, I don't remember right now. So this test will be in portal also, of course, because a lot of students from our group still not in Russian. With some group we've got only online lessons, so in October I think all tests, all exercise will be in portal also. Also later we've got some Zoom lesson where we will speak about famous scientists, but not next, it's later. So sometimes on our seminars we've got some Zoom connection, sometimes another connection, and all test, all exercise will be in portal also. And also if you got some question, you know my number, you know my email, and you can write me, of course. So as I see, no question, okay. So I see a lot of students here. 23, 15, 15, 27. Great. Also, of course, I'll check your answers to previous seminars, and soon you will see your points. For example, with some groups, and it's groups, just a second, 24, 22, and 20, we will get seminar on Tuesday, and on Tuesday on portal also you will see your points to previous seminar, to essay and question, and Wednesday and Tuesday for another group. So I'll read your essay, check it. It's a lot of essay, a lot of answers. That's why wait and you will see your points. But I can say that everything okay. So let's finish with our lecture. This presentation I will download it to portal also. Also I download it to WhatsApp to your mentors, and you can read it more. And if, for example, you don't understand something, you can find some answers there. So this presentation I will send it today near evening. Not right now, near evening. So, okay, let's finish. I was glad to see you. If you've got some question, write me in mail or in portal soon. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.